Welcome to Bikaner House. We have today a very interesting program, a presentation first, and then a conversation of Anil Revri's work. Post the presentation, Anil will be in conversation with Annapurna Garimella, who's an art historian, and Sunil Mehra, a theatre person and a journalist. To give you a brief introduction about Anil Revri, Anil is an Indian-American artist whose unique style incorporates Eastern and Western artistic, philosophical, and religious traditions. He is the first Indian artist to be granted a solo show by a major American museum, namely the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and is acknowledged as being in the vanguard of the transmodern movement. Each work becomes a meditation and represents a single journey into the void. For Revri, this void holds the key to our deepest emotions, love, fear, and desire among them. Revri's work is featured in collections worldwide. There's a long list, and I'm not going to go through the list, but I would just like you to know that his work can be found in many of the major museums around the world. Before we begin, I'd also like to thank Geetu Hinduja for organizing the evening today. I now invite Anil to come up and present his work.
I'm happy to be here and to see so many friends and a very healthy crowd. Let me begin right away by thanking my partner in Washington, who makes it possible for me to travel and stay away from home for extended periods of time. My friend Geetu Hinduja for helping me get this show on the road. Annapurna Garimella and Sunil Mehra for their participation. Priya Pal and the team of Bikaner House for their logistical support. And of course, to all of you who've taken the time to be here tonight. The presentation is a visual record of my journey in search of self. It begins with my debut exhibition at the Jahangir Art Gallery in 1976 and ends with my show at the American University Museum in 2012. I will briefly explain the circumstances surrounding the creation of the work, the choice of subject matter, and the methodology employed in developing the different series. It all began after a motorcycle accident during my sophomore year at the JJ School of Art. Trauma sustained to the head had damaged my olfactory nerve and destroyed my sense of smell. Alternative therapies had not helped, and the feeling of being cooped up in a glass cookie jar grew worse with time. It wasn't until a year later, while sitting under the peepal tree in the compound of the JJ School of Art, that I had my eureka moment. I came to understand the correlation between image, sound, and emotion. That by combining these elements, it was possible to alter consciousness and influence behavior. I reasoned that if each image had a corresponding sound and smell and evoked a specific response, then inversely, every sound and smell had a corresponding image. Therefore, it was theoretically possible to identify a smell simply by sourcing it from memory. The drawings and paintings that emerged out of this experience began as a form of therapy that inadvertently led to the development of a personal style. And the making of each piece served the same function for me as the Madeleine had for Proust, evoke memory. The entire body of work created in the last 40 years can be divided into two distinct groups. The first group, executed between 1976 and 1996, comprises abstract landscapes that portray nature in a constant state of flux, and two series of pen and ink drawings that explore a variety of subjects, myths, symbols, psychoanalysis, and the occult. The second group, begun in Washington, D.C. in 1996, is surreal in that it seeks to give form to experiences of a spiritual nature through the technique of geometric abstraction. The paintings from Phase 1, Untitled Landscapes 1976 to 1996. The inspiration for these works finds its roots in childhood memories of looking out the window of a moving train and becoming aware of three views. The first portrayed the landscape outside the window, the second reflected the scene inside the compartment, and, depending on the viewer's position in relation to the window, the third view incorporated a reflection of the viewer against the backdrop of the compartment, superimposed on the image of the scene outside. Furthermore, owing to the speed of the moving train, the immediate foreground had appeared to be blurred, and things had come into focus as the eye traveled up towards the middle ground and horizon. Approximately 80 paintings produced during this period can be divided into three series. Each series represents a different view of the world, from the micro to the macro. The effect is like looking at the landscape with a camera fitted with a zoom lens. Starting with the horizon line in the first series, the camera zooms in to focus on details in the middle ground and foreground till it brings me to the ground line or myself. Drawings from Phase 1, Freud, Jung, and Tantric Chakras. As I had been confined to bed for most of the year after the accident, I spent my time reading Freud's interpretation of dreams, Jung, Carlos Castaneda, Dante's Inferno, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and any materials I could find on Tantra. Needless to say, these materials inspired two series of drawings executed with a rapidograph pen. The Freud-Jung series I executed between 75 and 78 and depict fantastic and often erotic imagery and focus on the interpretation of dreams. The drawings depicting Tantric Chakras were executed between 77 and 81 after being exposed to Tantric meditation and by reading the commentaries on the different chakras. Each drawing contains a faithful reproduction of one chakra, and the compositions have been developed around this central motif. Phase 2, 1996 to the present. Having addressed the three focal lengths in the earlier works, I had arrived at the gateway or myself. I now had the option of staying firmly rooted in the familiar or stepping into the unknown. I chose the latter. Therefore, all the works created after 1996 are designed to encourage introspection and rely upon the theory of 1 + 1 = 3, with the emphasis on the third part created by the interaction of the first two. As this void holds the key to our deepest emotions, love, fear, and desire among them, the work serves as a vehicle to transport the viewer into the depths of psychic space. The first series, the Veiled Doorway series of paintings, 1996 to 1997. Though abstract in their rendering, these paintings have been inspired by Eastern philosophy, specifically Tantra. They've been methodically constructed in layers by repeating a particular action, that of drawing a line, thus becoming meditations in themselves. In the Tantric tradition, these paintings serve as yantras or diagrams to be used in meditation. The use of line as the common denominator helps to eliminate any recognizable figurative or landscape imagery. Mood and atmosphere are achieved by the way the optic nerve perceives light and color on different frequencies. Each variation in line, oblique, broken, dotted, or curved, creates a specific response and evokes a particular memory. The grid in the foreground acts as a veil while intensifying the negative space. The concentration of line in some of these paintings allows the surface to act as a mirror and is particularly effective in reflecting ghost-like images of the viewer superimposed on the surface of the painting. The result is an overlapping of transparent planes that seem to move in and out of each other depending on the viewer's relation to the work. There is no narrative here, excepting that of order beneath the restless surface. Pages from a Manuscript series, Mixed Media on Handmade Paper, 1996 to the present. The compositions for these works have been developed using a combination of calligraphy and geometry to create the illusion of three-dimensional space, lending these pieces a sculptural quality, allowing them to become private altars. The repetition of the word Ram in Devanagari script in some of these works is used as a design element and maintains a consistent ratio between positive and negative space. The inscriptions remind one of carvings, bas-relief, and inlay work on the walls of religious buildings. While I've used Devanagari script, the approach seems almost Islamic, combining geometry and calligraphy as the basic design motif. Drawings from the Cultural Crossing series, 1998 to 2001. This interfaith project was conceived to create awareness of the profound influence religious traditions have upon pluralistic societies and draws upon the inspiration from the secular and liberal society of my childhood, New Delhi after partition. 18 drawings developed as part of this initiative stress the similarities in the teachings of Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and Sikhism. The three themes represented in Cultural Crossings are peace, desire, lust, greed, and renunciation, and are shared by all 6 religions. Each drawing incorporates one scripture in its native language in the form of calligraphy. The number 3 plays an important role in the development of these works. 3 themes are represented in 3 suites that address 3 traditional focal lengths that in turn represent the 3 states of awareness. Finally, the number 3 also symbolizes the Trinity, Creator, Preserver, Destroyer. The challenge lay in creating drawings that were similar in their construction, dimension, color, size of central window, and calligraphy used for the borders, but different in appearance. The idea, visually, is to gain access to the magic window that is not veiled in the hope of uniting with the Supreme Being. As we move from one drawing to the next, we discover that the central windows in the drawings from Suite 1 and 2 are veiled and inaccessible. However, as we approach the works from Suite 3, we are more hopeful. Depending on the viewer's position in relation to the drawings, the central windows in these works appear to be dark and unobstructed. This visual trick is achieved by printing the text as reverse type on reflective mylar. As we move closer to the work to confirm our suspicion, we are disappointed to learn that there is still something obstructing our view. Owing to the dim lighting conditions in galleries and museums, we are unable to decipher the true nature of this obstruction until we are standing immediately in front of it. At this point, we become aware of 3 things. First, that the obstruction or veil is made up of horizontal lines of text in one of 6 languages. Second, and more controversial, that at this juncture, it is the dogma of religious scripture that prevents us from uniting with the Supreme Being. Finally, we are confronted with a ghost-like image of ourselves superimposed with scripture, peering back at us from the depths of the rectangular window. This transformation encourages introspection while serving as a visual pun. Having come to look at the work, one is confronted with oneself. Geometric abstractions, 2000 to 2005. Approximately 40 linear constructions executed on handmade paper using gold, silver, metallic markers, graphite, and poster color have been inspired by childhood memories of the stage. They have been created while listening to the Gayatri Mantra, thus becoming meditations in themselves. The compositions have been carefully developed to take full advantage of the color, texture, and cloud-like formations present in each sheet of paper, and have been designed to lead the eye from the outer edges of the work to the immeasurable depth situated at the visual center of the composition. The paintings from the Ram Darwaza series, 2008 to 2011. These works pay homage to my mother, a leading exponent of the classical Indian dance forms of Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi. She had, in her final days, expressed a great desire to be able to enter into one of my geometric compositions and, accompanied by Lord Rama, dance her way into the distant horizon. The paintings are an attempt to recreate memory and serve a dual function. They are simultaneously visual aids to meditation and meditations in themselves. The illusionary three-dimensional space, achieved with the help of geometry, serves as metaphors for the past, present, and future while stressing the three states of awareness: conscious, subconscious, and unconscious states of mind. Since the linear constructions also allude to the stage, the compositions have been developed using the word Ram in Devanagari script and incorporated into the design as calligraphy. Sculpture, Wall for Peace, 2011. This site-specific sculpture was created for my exhibition at the Katzen Art Center in 2012. It is a four-sided LED screen that displays English translations of scriptures related to peace from 6 religions. Each horizontal band of text contains one selection from each of the religions and scrolls across the surface of the unit. Rays of light emanating from the unit projected onto the viewers as they walk around the work becomes a symbolic act of cleansing of racial and religious prejudices. Viewers who prefer non-violent and peaceful resolutions to conflict could tie silver ribbons on the lattice partition situated at the exit in a show of solidarity. The sculpture was later displayed at Washington Dulles International Airport, where it remained on view from 2012 to 2014. I would like to end on a personal note by comparing my role as an artist to that of a medium or dancing dervish. As I dance, one hand, palm facing upwards, receives grace, while the other, palm facing downwards, shares the experience. This sense of ecstasy is described by Rumi in a poem from the Divan-e Shams-e Tabrizi entitled Dance of the Cosmos. It goes like this: O daylight, break so the particles dance, so to his tune the firmament and space dance, so ecstatic souls having no head or feet dance. I will whisper in your ear where they dance. Thank you.
So why does Anil Revri interest me?
I have no idea.
My acquaintance with Anil predates my acquaintance with his art. That followed. But on the other hand, I had coursed through images when I was net surfing, and I was particularly struck by him and his images. So when I met him, it was a eureka moment. Why did his work move me? In the age of Google, where much that is replication passes off as inspiration, he stands out as an original, as a purist, as a thinker. When I was going through his work, much of what he said interested me for the way it was manifested in his work. So here is a very eminent journalist's son who, in typical Avara fashion of 74, 77 vintage, announces his intent to be an artist and is fondly, indulgently supported by the parents. But of course he's too impatient because he wants to get on with the business of painting, which he's been doing since his childhood. And so he chooses the shortest course available to him at the JJ School of Arts, which happens to be interior design, because he wanted his education to be done and over. 74, he has an accident that deprives him of the sense of smell, which is what he was talking about. And then this boy stroke man who was reading Proust at that point, who was inspired more by Rothko and by Pollock rather than homegrown talent. It was a very febrile talent, Bombay. Early Bhupen had made his mark, Manjeet was making his debut, Hussain, Krishna Khanna, the reigning demigods of the progressive movement, Tayyab, Akbar Padamsi were ruling the roost, and there was much to be inspired of. It was early, raw, visceral work. It was a very pulsating moment in Indian art history. But he was looking at quieter, more meditative works. He was looking at Pollock. Pollock was somebody, even the art establishment laughed off the page, laughed off the canvas initially. Rothko, with his quiet Zen, meditative quality. So what was he painting at that point? Between 76 and 96, it's a long time. What was he doing? He was doing landscapes. Did it degenerate, slide into sentimentalism, academic realism of the kind that many art critics delight in staring at, with very good reason? His landscapes strike you as something that evokes memory, which is the title of his lecture today. The smell of water with the rain. How do you recapture that moment? The water body, when you pass that, this particularly fetid smell, how do you recapture that? The scent, the smell, the fragrance that was lost to him of multiple things, he recapped through his paintings, through his landscapes. Again, what was he looking at? He was looking at Turner. He was looking at Constable. I remember a particular moment when he made a remark that really went home to me, when he walked into the Ashmolean at Oxford and looked at a cloud painting by Constable, which was essentially Constable diving into the center of a cloud, where he said it was white on white on white, and it was as if he dived into the heart of a cloud. And that spoke to him. In the series that we just saw of the landscape paintings, you will see that feeling. A childhood spent in railway compartments as trains rushed past the Indian countryside, as we all know that memory. But when the background, the middle ground, the foreground, it all passes by in a blur, alternatively distinct, alternatively receding, how do you capture that moment? The smell, the sight, the sound of it. That is what his landscapes did, and it has the cadence of a mantra, it has the meditative quality of a prayer. Come 97, the artist would move to New York, 81, City Lights. There was a lot of, Annapurna and I were laughing about it yesterday, where she said, the pot, the smoking, yeah, the rock and roll days, sex, drugs and rock and roll. A lot of the Freud Jungian stuff, Carlos Castaneda, all of that you saw in the drawings there, the tantric stuff. A young man venting, his inner scapes were coming out at that point. That was who he was at that time. Come 81, moves to the States. 86, gets married.
Yeah.
93, divorces. Moves to Washington. Father's a Woodrow Wilson Fellow. Invites the son to come there. And then this man who was studying interior design at JJ enrolls for a course at Parsons, again the shortest course possible, 3 years, graphics and communications. At which point, in 94, he has another milestone moment. He has another car crash. He's rear-ended. And what does he lose this time? Balance, vision, speech. It all loses its center, as it were. The man is shaken to the very core. He's lost his olfactory sense before. It has come back gradually over the years. This time it's balance, speech, vision. And what comes into play there? Geometry, exactitude, balance, which is what his quest was. So it was recapping smell area. The move to geometry was almost a natural progression And you can see the clean lines, the draftsmanship, the exactitude, the precision with which he came back to it. But did he come back for that alone? No, not really. He was done with the externalizing. Like he said to me, he was done with the horizon, the middle ground, the foreground, and now he was on ground zero. It was time to look not out, but in. Which is where the geometric abstraction came from. Often as people that write on art, as art critics, we are frustrated by what somebody famously described to me, and Mehra will collaborate that she's in the audience here. A dribble there and a dribble here that passes off for abstraction. However, when you look at Picasso, when you look at anybody else out there, Monet, Picasso, Mondrian, Rothko, Pollock, these were consummate artists who arrived at a language of art after having been through multiple processes. And they were consummate masters of the line. They chose to exercise their feelings, their emotions, manifest them in a certain medium, in a certain fashion. And that was their abstraction. My submission is, Anil Crew, his geometric abstraction is not to be looked at as mere abstraction. It's a quest. What does he listen to, for instance, when he paints? That came up perchance. It's mantras. There are cadence. I'll ask you to rewind to, for instance, the handmade paper series, or was it the one before the handmade paper series, where you can actually see movement within, what is that?
Cultural crossing? No. Not the cultural crossings.
Not the cultural crossing.
Doorways?
The doorways.
Okay. Paintings?
Yeah. But no, not these. I have it down here. I'll tell you. But this was the handmade paper series.
Pages from a manuscript.
Pages from a manuscript. Which is where you see it has a hushed quality about it. It's like this lovely exhibition that I saw years ago at Gira Sarabhai's museum, where Darshak Patel had lit up these Chola bronzes. In the way they were lit, you felt at any time, if there was a breeze in the room, the little dangler in Parvati's ear would move with it. The pages from a manuscript have that quality. You feel if I just stir, maybe this page will fly. It has that quality, and that takes tapas. That takes a quality of manan. That doesn't come easy. Is it political work? Is art, after all, supposed to reflect the macro reality around us? Yes and no and yes again. When was cultural crossings made? When was Ram Darwaza made, for instance? This work is foregrounded really against the ferment that we've experienced in the 90s. The Ram Mandir. Bolo Jai Shri Ram. It is no accident that the man at that point of time returned to core issues, to the things that really moved him. When you've been through so much, when you've lived through so much, you harken back to the real nodal moments. And so the cultural crossings is something you really have to view in that context. And again, it speaks to you very evocatively, very starkly, very simply, but very elegantly, very beautifully. Song's embellishment, it delivers a quiet message. And finally, Ram Darwaza, which to me is the summum bonum of his works. To me, mother as a dancer, the accoutrements of stage, the sightlines on stage, the lone dancer, the lone speck of a figure in the middle of this enormous stage, the focal point of attention. And then he spoke of vanishing point. And his mother said it beautifully when she said, You know, I just want to disappear with Lord Ram into that central speck, into that moment of oblivion and nothingness. There's a chronicle of Narnia kind of, the wardrobe opening in Narnia, and you step into this magic world, except that this is much more than magic, this is mystic. When you look at his Ramdagata, with those walls within doors, opening the windows of perception literally, where you dip into vanishing point and then into the great beyond, which is what his mother said. She said, I just want to hold Ram's hand and disappear through that door into the great beyond. Finally, the installation at Dallas Airport, which is so, which evokes the Kaaba. Coming back to the point I began, in the times and context we live in, where we have a lot of Google whiz kids, whether art or literature or poetry or the performing arts or food or fashion, it is a pleasure to come across the original mind that sparks off, that stirs something in you. You walk through many art fairs and you look for that one moment when something shifts within you. I thank Anil for having me experience that shift. For that, I owe him a debt of gratitude, which is why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Rather humbling.
That was really nice. It was like a really nice riff, and after looking at his work, very focused manner. So I think mine are more questions because I'm like the perpetual questioner. And I'm probably going to ask you to move a little bit out of one narrative and step into another one. Okay. So the question, I picked 4 things I wanted to talk to you, and then I have another question which is not tied to a specific work. I like the way you use the Kaaba. You brought up the Kaaba reference. When I looked at this, I know you live in Washington, D.C., and I too have lived in Washington, D.C. for a year. The interesting thing about this work is that you were in New York during those big years of the 80s when all these artists like Barbara Kruger, who you would also be very familiar with because of your graphic design background, people like Ann Hamilton, people like Jenny Holzer, who made these remarkable work of a kind of like neon graffiti along the marquees of pornography theaters, porn theaters, old theaters on Broadway. And I would see them every day, and I saw this work, and I thought, wow, it's a very interesting connection I make to it, or is being made for me. The other thing that really came to my mind was Maya Lin's Vietnam War Memorial, where the text makes people cry every time they go there. And it's such a moving monument. And I was very curious for you to talk about that, but also talk about, yes, I know this was in a museum first and then it went into Dulles Airport. So this kind of aesthetics in part developed because of Reagan-era America, but you've made this work in the age of terrorism in America, in a sense, right? The war on terror. So we really appreciate if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Well, fundamentally to me, it's again going back to pluralism, and throughout the entire body of work, especially after '96, I've included scripture to, if you want to call it, a soft sell, because of course you have the ticker tape, right. Breaking news, gives you the information, doesn't tell the viewer what to make of it, but presents it. And what becomes obvious is, of course, the scripture being read in different languages for the viewer then to become aware that there in fact is a correlation between all 6. So in that respect, yes, there was inspiration from the Kaaba. There's primarily, if you look at early Judaism, early Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, the idea of circumambulation exists in all civilizations and religions. So the idea was, in this particular piece, it becomes a monument to peace where at the Kaaba you have the sea of people going around this central monolith, paying homage to that particular piece. What I wanted to do was go a step further and say that the text is only the skin of this piece. And the skin moves along with the people. So the mass of people coming to pray there and the scripture is paying homage to a yet greater entity that lies hidden inside the unit, which nobody sees. So the one, if we want to call it the supreme being, is far greater than the scripture or the people who come to worship. So that was the idea. And yes, Jenny Holzer and all of these people, Maya Lin, since I see it in DC all the time, it was created for the space, if you saw, at the Katzen. So initially the show was going to be a retrospective exhibition. Then Donald Cuthbert sent me his essay, and it's his title, Faith and Liberation Through Abstraction. And I asked him if I could borrow the title for the show. And it got me rethinking, because the director of the museum gave me this enormous space on the ground floor, and it has this sort of cycloramic wall in the atrium. And I thought to myself, how the hell am I ever going to make a work, a geometric abstraction, that is going to fit in visually into this space? No, it'll take me 6 years to make. So I started thinking about other stuff, and then of course Donald's essay. And I decided to make the work more a retrospective from '96, where I've included a lot of scripture in my work. And so it worked beautifully for me in the design sense. And then I got to learn about the material and what it could do. So if you see it's dark, and then the text starts at one point, the room is dark. So in a way it's again symbolic. As the scripture on peace starts and lights up the room, the whole place just lights up with grace. And then when it ends, because every few cycles it has to stop to reboot, and then it starts again. But then when the text ends, all of a sudden the room is enveloped in darkness again. So when the scripture on peace disappears. So I thought that was another added element. So normally I try and layer different things, different meanings into each work. It's not just scripture for the sake of, not arbitrarily put there. Yeah.
So when you do a work like this, do you stand in a corner and watch what people do?
I do.
And so what did you discover?
Actually, I had a very humbling experience. Talk in terms of being an artist and somebody coming to say something about your work. I was visiting there one morning, and the student walked up to me and he said, I know you're the artist because I came for the talk, and I just wanted to tell you that I'm very stressed because I've got my finals going on. So every morning I come and I spend 15 minutes in front of your sculpture to sort of de-stress, and then I go to class. And so he said, I just want to let you know that. And to me, that really brought tears to me. It was something that was felt so genuinely by a person that if something that I have managed to create or helped to create can move somebody to that degree, is really humbling.
So you make work like this in a space where it's pluralistic, no doubt, but pluralistic to the extent that America is pluralism as defined by, let's say, a white Christian majority. How does this kind of work feel in the institutional, in the public spaces of America today for you? Because you started in one era, like late Carter, Reaganite era, and then now you're in the age, well, Donald Trump is still new, but this is the George Bush era, and then Bill Clinton, all these things. So I'm asking you to maybe, of course I completely acknowledge the meditative nature of what you're doing, but I'm also curious how that kind of meditativeness is situated in a particular social and political cultural moment.
Interesting, because I'll go back to the Cultural Crossing series. So I started making the Cultural Crossing series after my accident in '98. Again, began as a form of therapy because I had problems with vision, depth perception. Yeah. So anyway, there's suite of 18 drawings, 3 each. Begins again with memories of India, childhood memories of having friends from all different faiths. It was never we went to the house of a Muslim to eat. We all celebrated Ramzan or Eid. People brought sevaiya. So when we had Diwali, so it was all sort of intermingled. There wasn't this racial divide, at least not that I experienced. Also, it was soon after partition, and the horrors of partition were still fresh in the minds of my parents' generation and and of course, living in Delhi, at least from my understanding, it was conveyed to me that there were such horrors that something like this should never be repeated again, because people suffered on both sides of the divide. I mean, families were separated. So with all of that in mind, I started thinking about these issues. I looked at a lot of early manuscripts, Christian manuscripts, Islamic manuscripts, Baba Dharma, and a lot of miniature painting. And I thought to myself, and I said, this is a good format because I like the small space, and it seems very sacred. I mean, you've been to the Sackler when you're going to the dungeon and you look at this little miniature, it just involves you. Yeah, it engages you in a way that a gallery space doesn't. So I thought that was one decision, that I wanted them small. And then, of course, I decided the subject, 3 themes which are common to all 6 religions. So I set about doing this. I wanted to involve a lot of scholars, but I soon found out that everybody I spoke to, to provide text or become part of the project, wanted to tell me what was so good about their particular religion. If I got a Christian scholar, to them it was Christian manuscripts were the best. If I found an Islamic scholar, the Islamic miniatures were the best. So at some point I said, to hell with this, I can't take care of so many egos, and I decided to start researching the 3 themes. And oddly, I came across a book called World's Anthology of World Scripture, written by no other than the Moonies.
Oh.
So, but they had all, they had these 3, all of the subjects, the original English translations, but the text noted as to where I could find the original. So I set about doing that, and then it took me 3 years to make it. Of course, you mentioned social events. So what happened is, one of the darkest moments in modern history also is 9/11. So I had been making the drawings for 3 years, and the curators had come to see it, everything. There was mild interest. I hadn't put the text in the drawings yet. So suddenly I got a call from the Corcoran, who already had my work, and the curator called me and he said, "Have you finished the drawings?" I said, "No." And he said, "How long will it take you?" I said, "Depending, you want all 18? He said, "No, I want the first series, Suite 1. He said, "I'd like to acquire them for the Corcoran, and I'd like you to put the text in, and I want to show them at the acquisition show in maybe 2 weeks." He said, "How long will it take you?" I said, "Give me a week, I'll put the text in." So that's what happened. I mean, I made the drawings. There wasn't that much interest in them before 9/11. Come 9/11, they were then being shown in different places, in museums. Everybody's talking about them. So some things happen that are, completely out of your control.
Also, I think certain kinds of work speaks to certain moments.
They do.
Yeah.
And it was also, I'd like to mention that is because I again watched a lot of visitors, by being a fly on the wall. I noticed that when I had one person from Hinduism, one person from Islam standing there and looking at the work, and the text was on the wall, everybody was on the same page. We love it. Yes, yes. The moment I got two people from the same religion, the problem started. Because the first one wanted to show the second one that he was either a better Hindu or a better Christian or a better Muslim. And I said, this is really uncanny. As long as you have them separated, they're okay. So I found that quite interesting. Yeah.
Can you go forward? So I'm going to switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, these are your drawings, and ostensibly they're very different, right? Like one's sort of Husseini, and one's kind of like pop artish.
70s,
and whatever Castaneda and whatever, and then you have your the drawing that comes out of your fractal series at the very end. But
that's a painting.
Yeah, sorry, a painting. But I wanted you to talk. I saw a lot of similarities, actually.
No.
A kind of interest in the line, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about. You've talked about the picture plane quite intensely, but actually a lot of your picture planeness is also manifests itself in terms of lines, like for example in the Temple Wall series. But in these works, what I really find interesting is the curve and the movement of the line. So please talk about the line a little bit, and also the pleasure of doing such intricate, detailed work. Like, what is your practice like? What do you do with your day? What happens to your eyes? What happens to your hands?
Yes.
So when we were talking, he talked about a particularly landmark exhibition he saw at the Met, which was Sirat, and his line for it. And he said, the way he evokes motion was something that really spoke to me. And of course, the Misocha, which we discussed.
Well,
so
personal favorites, but yeah.
In which sense? Coming back to drawing.
But also, and then when I saw your fractal series and the kind of lines and, even in the geometric Ram Darwaza series, the sort of very fine dots that you made, the artist Via Clemens, who does these amazing astral skies, and that kind of detailed, there's a certain kind of turn towards a kind of maturing, I think. That's the way I look at it right now. I might not be correct, but the way I see it is that a certain kind of inwardness and maturing that artists have gone through in the 2000s, you and many others, I know several others. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about your practice, your pleasure in the line, but also, like, what does this kind of work mean in the world right now? Yeah. So what kind of, just to repeat it really quickly, I was asking Anil, these ostensibly look really different because they're three different kinds of images and three different stages, maybe even a little bit. But I see there a commonality, which is the sort of deep pleasure in the line in taking a blank surface and rendering it. And I was really interested in what happens to him in his studio. What's his practice like? What happens to his body? Because so much of his work has come out of bodily experiences. And then finally, I was also asking him about a certain turn that we see in the late 90s, but particularly in the 2000s, where several artists, not necessarily a movement, but spread across, are really focused on very fine drawing, very strong, committed time spent in front of the surface. Artists like Via Clemens, who does Astral Skies, and other people. So if you could just talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Well, the main thing about the line is rhythm. So it's also connected to music. So in a way, you mentioned fractals. So I don't know if there's a wonderful documentary on fractals about what they are, generated by the IBM supercomputer. So they fed all these mathematical equations into this computer, and it came up with imagery. And the imagery was kaleidoscopes. It's a spiral. It's a never-ending spiral. And so the fractal, Mendelssohn's fractal, is, if you look at that kaleidoscope, that whirlpool, and you select any one point on it, when you enlarge it, it is a replica of what you've just seen. So it's a world within a world within, and it's never ending. So in a way, that's what's happening. That's, as human beings, I think that's what we are in terms of DNA. We just keep going on, and irrespective of what happens to us in our life, we try and pick up and make the best of it and move along. So the line is that common denominator that binds different periods, different phases, all the way from childhood to adulthood. And it sort of marks your journey through this space, if you will.
Also, if I may, we talked a lot about interiority, which has been really his journey. So if you look at it, there's a kind of exuberance and a kind of outgoingness about those two works there. And interiority really speaks to you here. It was time to look inward. So in that sense, the journey's been really from the external to the internal to what he talks about as shunya, the vanishing point. He said something very interesting to me where he said, I do listen to the mantra, a mantra, the cadence of the mantra is important when I'm working, because imagine if I was listening to Beethoven, my line would go wild, the colors would just go wild over there.
Yeah. So I said I use it as a metronome.
As a metronome, really. So it has cadence. It has the quality of a prayer. It has the rhythm of a chant.
That's why I also had begun to appreciate Islamic architecture and painting, because it's confined to, there's so many limitations, which then really pushes you to the end. I mean, you really have to...
You have to work with it.
You have to work at it to get somewhere, yeah. So that's what I really like about that, is basically it's a process of problem solving. So while if you're solving a problem in front of you visually, there are also problems that you're solving internally, emotionally or spiritually, whatever. And you just keep working at them, and sooner or later you find an answer. In a way, but you only find that answer is what is we know as darshan. So to me, darshan is a complete lack of ego. Normally it's referred to for a deity. You go and you receive darshan. But to me, darshan can happen at any time and will not happen unless all the veils are dropped. And what does that mean in psychological terms? That basically you bare yourself and are able to, face yourself.
So what, are you like naked in your studio?
No. I'm naked in my mind, not physically. But
please tell me what happens to your body when you do this.
body hurts.
Yeah.
Because I stand up for most of these works, the large works, since '96. And it's up on the wall and I work on it. Then I step back. My studio is placed in, the configuration is such that I walk 15 paces back and then I come back to make the dots, because I actually have to see what the circumference of the dot is in some of the paintings. It changes. It's like, again, out of focus, in focus. So at 15 paces, what is out of focus is in focus in 5. But then you really you can't have a viewer standing 5 feet away from the painting at all times, since the scale is so large. So you work out all those relationships, but while you're doing that, your mind is still processing or working on problem solving of how to get all these ideas that you have, these emotions, to be able to convey them with very little. I use gold, silver, metallic markers and accents of color. I don't use a lot of color now, unlike the earlier work, which was visceral reaction to color. So I think that's one of the reasons. I had this conversation with my mother many a time, because she used to always say, I like your geometric abstractions, but my favorites are still the landscapes. And I kept asking her, I said, why? Give me a reason. And she said, I can't tell you, I just respond to them. And then it's sort of ironical that in her last days, she wanted geometric abstraction, not a landscape. So,
So I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
And it has nothing to do with the specific work, but it's as in the conversation, thank you. In the conversation we had before this event, आपने कहा मेरे से कि sometimes I feel a bit like धोबी का कुत्ता न घर का न घाट का. As you move in these last 3-4 years between India and the US, you've been dealing with your father's death and all the accompanying details that surround such an event. Generally, I could put you in an American lineage of artists. I could put you in an Indian lineage of culture, which is different. Indian pluralistic thinking, Indian historical experiences. I don't see a conflict between the two, perhaps because of my own background of having lived in two cultures. So I was very curious, because "Dhobi ka kutta na ghar ka na ghat ka" sounds painful. But I can see that also potentially, because in the same conversation you were already moving on from that position. And I wanted to ask you what you thought about that kind of in-betweenness. Because a lot of your paintings do have a lot of in-between spaces.
It's all about
the in-between. And what that in-betweenness now, in this stage in your life, would mean in terms of, would it be productive, generative, this movement back and forth between India and the US, could you see it that way? Could you see?
I can see it that way, actually. The only reason I used that phrase was not so much that about two civilizations or cultural identities, but more having to shuttle back and forth without without having much control over when I had to move. But both cultural peculiarities are seen in my work. I bring my Indianness to, if you want to consider it a Western idiom, but then it's both East and West. That's who I am. I'm not just Indian because I don't know what it is, what it means to be Indian in that sense. I've grown up with a lot of cultures in India. We've got so many different states. We've got different cultures, different languages. So they're different people. To try and put them all into a box and say everybody should conform to this particular, either, no, but it's sort of counterproductive.
So where do you see yourself, do you have any sense of where you're headed in your practice with this moving between two different geographies? Where do you see your practice heading?
Not at the moment, no, because I'll have to, it normally takes me a while to mull over whatever's happened, and then to find, in a way my art is a lot like art form follows function.
Yeah.
So each series I try and find the best visual translation for my idea. So you said, you compared it to Jenny Holzer, you said it reminds you of different things. But I thought for that particular message, because it is a message that I wanted to convey,
Yes.
for that message,
That medium.
to me, there's nothing better than a ticker tape telling you about the urgency of the situation. And I don't really have to say anything. It's all there. So in my art, in the cultural crossings, the message is all there because the little blurb is on the wall with the original text and the translation. So I really, again, I don't have to say anything. I can then step back and let the viewer engage with the work. And they can, they're free to engage in any way they want. So in that sense, I'll let you know when I find the
I'll
next.
be around.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having
you.
me join you in this conversation.
Thank you. I want to take a minute again and thank both of you and a lot of old friends in the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've just been introduced to DG NGMA with my friend Suparna Satpathy, and of course we've got older friends, Krishnan Jain and Bobby and Varsha and college friends and Aruna. I mean, I've really, they've known me since I was that high. So thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you. We could, if you want, open it to
Does anyone have any questions, or you good?
Yeah.
Or maybe we can take it to Anil personally as we sip our wine or whatever.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to be, please join us for whatever snacks and drinks. But while that's going on, I'm going to play the video shot at Dulles Airport about War for Peace. So if any of you are interested, it's just going to be on the screen. So, thank you. I'm done. Thanks.
Let me help you with that, because I know when you're nervous, it's tough. Thank you so much.